We're on, well, if you have an art scroll, that's easiest. It's on page 360.
360.
You don't have an art scroll,
yes.
It's on
360?
Yeah,
360, or Exodus, Shemos, chapter 13, verse 1. Starting our discussion on Pesach. Okay. So it says the following. Oh, by the way, before I forget, this class is sponsored by Evelyn Mintz in memory of her father, Avram Abba and Naphtali.
Right. Okay.
Vaydaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, and Hashem spoke to Moshe saying, Kadesh li chol b'chor petikol rechem b'nei Israel, which means sanctify for me every firstborn, whether it's a person, a firstborn boy, I should say, being born, or whether it's from human or from an animal, firstborn animal, male animal. Lihu, God said it belongs to me. Okay. But why is there such a thing as we call it today redemption of the firstborn? What is that? Why do we have such a mitzvah like that? Does that have to do with?
Because Hashem redeemed that from Pharaoh. Pharaoh wanted to kill all the boys.
That's because remember the firstborn of the Egyptians and the firstborn of animals also were killed during the Makkah during the plague of the firstborn. So every firstborn child really belongs to God because he was saved. But that we'll see soon. They don't have redemption of the firstborn. Likewise, we don't. Well, I bet we do practice that, but I don't think. Maybe in Israel, if a Jewish farmer, if he has a firstborn animal, he would go ahead after redemption, redeem the particular animal.
You feeling
okay?
Right?
Okay. Yomer Moshe El Ha'am, and Moshe said to the people, "Or as a Yom Hazesh Yitzas Mitzrayim, it's a mitzvah to recall this day when you came forth from Egypt." Right? The base of the house of bondage. Ki b'chozik yod hotzi Hashem eschem mizeh, with a strong hand, God has taken you out from there, in this place. Below yechel chametz, and chametz shall not be eaten. Okay, let's see what it says over here. The Rambam says the following. This is what the Rambam says. On the words of Chorus Yom, you must remember this day, means Passover day. The Rambam says the following. Mitzvahs aseh is a positive commandment. Shall Torah, from the Torah, that we must discuss the miracles and wonders that happened to our ancestors in Egypt. And particularly, we must do so on the 15th day of the month of Nisan, which we call Pesach, the Seder night. And look what the Rambam says. He says, "Shenemar Zochoris Yom Hazeh." It says in Mitzrayim. He quotes the verse over here, verse 3, where it says, "You must remember this day when you came out of Egypt." And the Rambam adds to it, "Kemo shenemar Zochoris Yom HaShabbos." Just like it says similarly by Shabbat, remember the day of the Sabbath. That's what the Rambam says. The Rambam is comparing the Exodus from Egypt to remembrance of the Sabbath day. So the problem is, what type of comparison that? How do you compare redemption from Egypt to the Sabbath of creation? That's the question. Why does the Rambam have to say that? What does the Rambam mean by that?
Maybe he gave us freedom.
Yeah, so
both have to do with freedom of the spirit, concentration on Hashem.
It was like a birth of a new world, just like without the creation, or when we had creation, there's a mitzvah to remember what happened in creation, new events, something new that has taken place. Likewise, over here, it's a birth of a nation. Creation of a nation. Remember, we're not considered a nation until we departed from Egypt. Then we were considered a nation. And that's the reason why Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov never received the Torah. The question, why didn't they receive the Torah? Why did we wait till this time? Well, right after the Exodus, 7 weeks later, they received the Torah. Abraham was not, he was a fine Jew. Why couldn't he receive the Torah? Or Isaac, Jacob. Why didn't they receive the Torah?
Following.
What?
Huh? He had no following. He had no following.
Well, Abraham did.
There was no Jewish nation.
That's the point. There was no nation. God did not want to give the Torah to individuals. When Hashem gave it the Torah, we had to be a nation. And the going out of Egypt, the exodus of Egypt, created us as a nation. And later on, 7 weeks later, we received the Torah. And I think I'm sure I mentioned to you one of the morals that's one of my favorite morals. The moral always asks that question. Why is it that God performed the miracle of splitting the Red Sea and not any other miracle to redeem us from Egypt? Why specifically splitting of the Red Sea? So the moral says the following. It is just like when you have a child, usually the woman's water breaks and you have the birth. Likewise, over here, you have the break of the water, splitting of the sea, and you have the birth of a nation. So you see, when we talk about the exodus from Egypt, it means a birth of a nation, birth of Bnei Israel, and therefore the Torah was not given to Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, those were fine Jews, because they were not a nation. It had to be a nation before we could be given the Torah. And that's why the Rambam over here is trying to associate the redemption from Egypt to the creation of the world. Just like the creation of the world was something new, a birth of the world. Likewise over here, after the splitting of the Sea of Reeds, it was a birth of a nation. And then we went ahead and received the Torah. So that's why the Rambam is comparing the exodus from Egypt to the remembrance of the Sabbath. Yeah. Okay, now. So the next verse, we're on verse 4. Okay. Then it says, verse 4, today you are leaving, you're departing from Egypt, the Chodesh Aviv, in the month of, in the spring month. Okay, now, when we talk about the prohibition of not eating chametz, we know we're not allowed to eat chametz the whole holiday of Pesach. And some, it could be started Erev Pesach, usually by 10:30 or whatever the time is the year, 10:30 or 11 o'clock. We're not allowed to eat chametz even Erev Pesach. But when it comes to not eating chametz, the original Passover, we call Pesach Mitzrayim, how many days were they prohibited from eating chametz?
When they left Egypt?
Yeah, when the first Passover we call Pesach Mitzrayim, the Egyptian Passover.
Until
how many days?
Until they stopped so that they could.
What? I don't hear you. Karen, you there?
Until they stopped, right, where they could cook the bread, the dough that they carried on their shoulders.
No.
Otherwise, they didn't eat chametz.
No. That's not the answer.
Because after they cooked the bread, was it still matzah or it didn't rise when they carried it on their shoulders? It all
depends upon how. That's the whole question. How many days were they prohibited from eating chametz? Or they had to eat matzah?
It has to be 8 days.
The answer is 1 day.
20.
Very interesting. Pesach Mitzrayim, we call the Egyptian Passover. The prohibition from eating chametz was only 1 day, and this is how the rabbis understand it. Remember, when the Torah is written, I'm talking about a Sefer Torah, there are no periods, there are no commas, no punctuation parts. So if you look at the on verse 3, the last 3 words, it says, "V'lo yochel chametz, chametz cannot be eaten. Hayom atem yotzim." Today, when you're leaving, according to our sages, it was 1 day. Only the day when they departed from Egypt was the prohibition from eating chametz. Hayom, only the day of Passover, not beyond that. The year after that, then they started the idea of 7 days. But they learned that because it's like a run-on, being like a run-on sentence. The last three words of verse 3 is below Chametz Hayom, and that's where in verse 4. Chametz cannot be eaten today, but after today, it could be eaten. So we see that's what our sages tell us, and so we see that really an exception to the rule. The only time when they had to refrain from eating chametz was one day, was only by Pesach Mitzrayim, the Egyptian Passover. After that,
so why did it change?
Right.
So why did it change?
The next year, that was kept. They observed it for 7 days. They couldn't.
For what
they could not
reason?
eat.
For what reason?
No, because of this. What I'm just saying. The rabbis understood it that it says, "Lo yechel chametz hayom." Do not eat chametz, cannot be eaten today. So only I'm talking about the Egyptian Passover. The Egyptian Passover prohibition for eating chametz was only one day.
But where does it only say that? Because later it says you have to eat it. You can't eat chametz for 7 days.
Look, I'll quote you the Gemara. The Gemara says the following. Look at it says. It's Gemara of Psachim. I look it up. Page 28b. It says Tanya. We'll learn Rabbi. I'm not making this up, Rabbi Yossi Haglili Omer. Rabbi Yossi said, from where do we know that that on the Egyptian Passover, that the prohibition for not eating chametz only lasted 1 day? Talmud Lomar, because the Torah says the following: below your chel chametz, and at the end of verse 3 says chametz to not be eaten. Right after that, the next verse, today you're going out. So it's like there's no period over there. You would end off the last verse of 3. Chametz cannot be eaten today when you're going out. That's how the rabbis understood it. Remember, we have periods and commas in the Torah. There's no punctuation marks, so I could read it like that. Lo yechel chametz hayom. Do not eat chametz today when you're going out. That's so exactly what our sages understand it. That Pesach Mitzrayim was different. That only 1 day was prohibition from eating chametz. In other words, that only the first day you had to eat matzah. After that, you could eat whatever you eat. That's what it says.
But then it says later on, but when you arrive in Israel, you'll eat it 7 days.
Even the year after. Once the Passover Mitzrayim ended, Egyptian Passover finished, the next year they had to keep Pesach for 7 days. Can I eat chametz for 7 days, and they only could consume matzah. I'm talking about this is the only exception. The first, what we call Pesach Mitzrayim, the Egyptian Passover. Chametz could not be eaten for 1 day. That's all. It ended then. Okay. Okay. Now it says chametz cannot be. Oh, what about even on Pesach? Let's say you have a cat or a dog or some sort of an animal. Are you permitted to feed a dog or one of your pets food that is chametz?
No.
Right, you're not allowed to. You have to feed.
You're not allowed to own it. You're not allowed to own it.
No, you could own the animal. You just can't serve.
No, not the animal. The chametz for the animal. You're not allowed to own the food.
Correct.
But that you give the dog.
But even though you're not eating it, you cannot feed it to the animal. Okay. Yeah, that's what it says. You're right. Chametz can be eaten, and the Gemara says, "Below your feed the club mean for dogs or whatever. Any animal you cannot go ahead and feed it. To feed them, you have to feed them kosher Pesach food. This is okay.
I made my dog a turkey on Pesach.
Excuse me?
I made my dog a turkey on Pesach.
That's okay.
No, I know.
That's fine. No, really. People are realizing also you can't serve your animals any chametz. They got to be kosher Pesach too. Okay. Okay. Let's go for it. Now, remember, when we went out, what was the season? What season? We got winter time, springtime. When did they go out? Spring. Why spring? Huh? Why spring? What happens to springtime?
Everything
growing. Everything's being
birth, right? So like a rebirth of nature. The trees are producing leaves. I see no leaves on my trees across the street. In another month, they're going to start blossoming forth. So again, it's symbolic of our exodus from Egypt, a birth of a nation. So that the season relates to the holiday. That's why it's springtime, it's not too cold, not too hot. Just a nice.
Maybe it made Pharaoh more angry because he needed them to go work on the land, and instead they left.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's a thought. Yeah, but I did mention this. This is a Gemara. It's not from the Torah. The Rosh Hashanah before the Egyptian Passover, they were not slaves anymore. If they worked, they were salaried. They got a salary. That's what we were told. Okay, so that you should know from Rosh Hashanah until Pesach Mitzrayim, if they worked for the Egyptians, they got salary for it. And that answers a question that I might have brought up maybe last year. When they had difficulties in the desert, right? They were wandering through the desert for 40 years. And every so often they said, why did you leave Egypt? Why did you take us out of Egypt? Let's go back to Egypt. Why do you want to go back to? Why do you want to go back to Egypt? But the answer was, well, if we go back to Egypt, at least we'll be salaried, we'll have money. Maybe we get food. They always complained they didn't have enough food, didn't have water, whatever it was. So that's why they wanted to go back. Because they knew they're not going to go back to slavery, according to their thinking, because they were freed already. They were not slaves from the Rosh Hashanah before the Exodus. Okay, that's what it says. Now on verse 5, it's now going to tell us how when they come to Eretz Israel, you'll soon see that it switches to like a 7-day observance. Verse 5. When God will bring you to the land of the Canaani. Now, the reason why you always find Canaani listed first, although there were 7 Canaanite tribes inhabited in the land of Israel. The reason why Canaani is mentioned first, they were the largest, and that's why we refer to it as Eretz Canaan, the land of Canaan, although there were other tribes. The Hachiti, the Chitim, where do we know about the Chitim? Hittites. The Torah mentions a very important incident that happened with the Hittites, with the Chitim. Who were the Bnei Chitim? Oh, you know. Remember,
it was the Jebusites that worked for them, right? Not the Hittites. The Jebusites worked for them.
No. The Jebusites was something else. The Chitim, that was the incident when Abraham wanted to purchase a burial ground to bury Sarah.
Right.
So who did he negotiate with? The Chitim, children of Chet. Well, Ephron was at that time. Okay, so that's the Chitim, the land of Canaanites, and Amorites. I don't know too much about them. Achivi, I don't know about Chivi. Chivya in Aramaic means a snake. Now, I'm told, I assume it's true. They say whenever a snake tastes anything, it always tastes like dirt. It doesn't taste. Everything tastes the same thing. So they call chivim because they, and I'm told that even farmers here in the United States could do the same. They used to taste the soil. And just by tasting the soil, they knew what to plant. Oh, this tastes like, this soil tastes like a good place to plant olives or whatever it may be. There was a certain technique they had. That's why chivi is related to it, chibyo, which means a serpent. Yevusi, you mentioned it. What do we know about the Jebusites? Yevusim?
When Joshua came, right? The Jebusites said they would work for the Israelis. Didn't they say that?
Which
was the tribe? The Girgashites or the Jebusites?
No, that was Givonim. But the Jebusites, Yevusim, were the ones who inhabited Jerusalem, the place where the Holy Temple eventually would be built. And they were driven out by David HaMelech. 10 years later, by King David, after he drove them out, then they were able to build the Holy Temple when Shlomo HaMelech took over. Okay, that's the Jebusites. Okay. It only mentioned 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's a couple of another two are not mentioned. The Girgashim were not mentioned because they left the land before Israel came in, and there was another. What other one was
Girgashites? Weren't they Girgashites?
The who? The
Girgashites.
that's let me see. What is the name? I forgot where. But yeah, that might have been the one. I can't remember the name. One was Girgashim. Yeah. Okay. So it says now when you'll be entering that land, going to Bnei Israel, God swore to your ancestors, really our forefathers, to give you Eretz of us, Chalav Udavash, a land flowing with milk and honey. Divided to us, and now you should go ahead and do the service. The service of the Paschal animal, that part they did have in Pesach Mitzrayim, they offered the korban, the sacrifice. You should do that service and all that things that pertain to the service on this particular month. Now, the thing is like this. The land flowing with milk and honey. We always use that. Okay, think about that. When it talks about honey, where does honey come from? Honey comes from a bee, right? Is a bee kosher?
No.
No, it isn't.
No.
So how are we allowed to eat the honey?
I told you it was from dates.
No. Well, it could be. Some say that honey means the sweetness of the dates, but simply it means the honey from a bee, bee's honey. So how are we really? A bee is not kosher. So how in the world are we permitted to eat honey? So the answer is very simple from this verse. If it wasn't for this verse, we wouldn't be able to. If since it's called the land flowing with milk and honey, if I can't eat honey, so what if it has honey in it? So what? I can't eat it anyway. So what do I care about it? But since the Torah says it's a land flowing milk and honey, I'm allowed to have honey. Yeah. Okay. That's the only reason why we're allowed to have it. Okay. Yeah, well, that's another problem. That's all. Okay. Verse 6. Now it's switching. I mentioned before that we only were obligated to eat matzah. No, we weren't allowed to eat chametz one day. But now we're saying Shivat Yomim Tochal Matzos. 7 days you have to eat matzah. Obviously, I mean for 7 days you can't eat chametz. Uvayom Hashivi Chag Hashem. On the 7th day shall be a holiday to Hashem. Okay.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Man.
It says 7 days you shall eat matzah, right?
Right.
Right. But didn't you say that in another place it only says that you only have to eat matzah the first night at the Seder?
Oh, I see. Oh, yeah. That's further. Let me give you. I know what you're talking about. It says be'erev tochu matzos. This evening you must eat matzah. A very good question. Let me go over it. Let me just get it. See this now? Yeah. Oh yeah. If you go back to chapter 12, the book of this same book, yes, chapter 12, verse 21. I'm sorry, verse 18. Chapter 12, verse 18 says the following: Bori shown the first month, also Yom LaChodesh, the 14th day of the month, Arab, in other words, the night of the 15th day of Nisan. Tochlu matzot. You must eat matzah. Erev tochlu matzot. From here, the rabbis say the following: it's true. If you want to eat bread, but throughout the holiday of Pesach, you're not allowed to. But the obligation, the chiyuv, the obligation to eat matzah is the erev tochlu matzah. The evening you must eat matzah. All the other times, other than the first night, it's optional. If you want to eat the bread, it means you have to eat matzah. But if you don't want to eat the whole Pesach, you don't want any bread, you don't have to eat matzah. If you want to, you could. It's optional. But the evening, what we call the first Seder night. But Erev Toklu Matzah, that's a chiyuv. It's an obligation to go ahead and eat matzah the first night. All the other times it's optional. That's what you must mean, right?
It uses the same verb, tacholdo, when it says for 7 days.
Yeah. But like I said, since it specifies, but Erev, this evening of the 14th night, the night after the 14th day, I should say, that in the evening you must eat matzah, according to our oral tradition, it only means the first night you're obligated to eat matzah. All the other times it's optional. If you don't eat a bread, you don't have to eat matzah either. If you want to have some sort of bread, then you have to eat matzah.
Which is the verb that said? Which is the word that makes it an obligation?
For erev tochlu matzah. But erev, in the evening you must eat matzah. You have that in chapter 12, verse 18.
Then it says on verse 7 or verse 6, Sheva Yamin Tochol Matzot.
Yeah, that's optional.
So it's the same verb.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's the way say the whole 7 days, other than the first night. If you want to have a bread, you must eat matzah. But an obligation to eat matzah is only the Seder night. But Erev Tochlu Matzah, that's the way it's interpreted. Even you must eat matzah. That's what it is. You understand?
No,
all the rest of the days, it's what do you call it? It's optional. It's not obligatory. You're obliged to eat matzah only the first night. That's why, that's why throughout Pesach, when you want to eat matzah, you don't say a bracha of ala chilat matzah. The God has commanded us on the mitzvah to eat matzah. You only do that on the first night, on the Seder nights. Because that's when you're obligated to eat matzah. All the other times you want to eat matzah, you want to eat a bread, you have to eat a matzah. You don't have to. You don't want to eat a matzah the whole week, you don't have to. Some people can't eat matzah, doesn't agree with them. But you know, no obligation, really. Only the first night, the Seder night. No, for us, it's 2 Sdorim, so the 2 Seder nights. But in Israel, only the first night.
If you don't eat matzah, how do you binge?
Well, so that's what they say. The obligation to eat matzah is not because of the obligation to eat matzah, but because I have to have a Suda for Yom Tov. So the only way I can have a Suda, I have to have a matzah because of the Suda, because of the meal. Not because of an obligation to eat matzah. So it's a little tricky. An obligation because of the Suda, the meal that I have to eat. That creates the obligation. But not the Torah says that even if you eat matzah, only the first night. All the rest is optional. If you want to have a bread, you have to have matzah. Okay. Going back to chapter 13, verse 6. So we have to understand it this way. Shivas yom etuchal matzos. When it's a 7 day eat matzah, not that it's a commandment you have to eat matzah. It means if you want to have a bread, then you have to eat matzah. For rather 7 days. But Yom HaShvi'i Chag L'Shem, of course, we also observe the 7th day as a Yom Tov. Because why? Yeah, why is it? Okay, I understand. We have matzah. We went out. We departed from Egypt at the 15th day of Nisan. So why is Pesach 7 days? How did it come 7 days? Why do we observe Pesach for 7 days?
It took us 7 days to get to the Yam Suf.
Right, that's it. The 7th day of Pesach was when the splitting of the Yam Suf took place and the people crossed the sea. So really, it was a 7 day period from the time they left Egypt until they actually departed completely out of the land of Egypt when they crossed the Yam Suf. Verse 7. Now, like I mentioned before, if you want to have a bread, you have to eat. Matzah has to be eaten for the 7 days. Now, here's the other thing. You're not allowed. You shouldn't have any chametz in your house. It should not be seen any chametz, and you're not allowed to. Or that's the leavening process. But the ingredients that cause yeast, I suppose it is, like yeast, that causes the leavening, that cannot be part of your house or throughout your boundaries. So that's why. That's another thing. Mehat Torah, strictly speaking from the Torah. If I say a verbal statement that I want to relinquish all my rights to my chometz in my house. I make a verbal statement like that. I want to relinquish any rights to it. Mehat Torah, strictly speaking from the Torah, that is acceptable. But midrabanan, the rabbis now look, if you own, who knows, let's say you own a grocery store or you own thousands of dollars of chometz food, you don't really mean that. So therefore, we go ahead and insist that you sell our chometz. That way, you want to leave some chometz in your house, you put it in a special closet, and through the rabbi, you can sell it to a non-Jew. So any chometz that you own is not yours throughout Pesach; it belongs to this non-Jew. And after Pesach, the rabbi buys it back from the non-Jew. But so strictly speaking, selling chometz is not from the Torah. There's no place to say in the Torah you must sell chometz. That's rabbinical, because you're afraid a person really is not really mean. If he owns thousands of dollars of chometz, he's going to say, I don't own it anymore. It's not in my possession. He's not going to mean that. So therefore, we have the rabbinical ruling of selling a chometz to the non-Jew for the duration of Passover, and after Pesach, we buy it back. So if you do have chometz in that you don't want to throw out, you put it in a separate place, separate closet, whatever, something like that, and make sure you tell the rabbi that you want him to sell it on your behalf to the non-Jew. We sell it to to Esau, our maintenance man. Yeah. Okay. Now we're on verse 8 also. Now here's an important verse that pertains to Passover. Tell your child, your son, on that day saying, so what mitzvah do you have to be Begadata? What do you use on Pesach? Haggadah. That's Haggadah means, yes, so it's a mitzvah.
You have to tell your children a story.
Right. The Haggadah is a mitzvah, a positive commandment that we perform on Pesach, the first night of Pesach, or here outside of Israel, the first two nights of Pesach. So telling the story to our children on that night. Now, what's the matter? Suppose you're alone. Suppose you're alone. You have nobody with you. For some reason, you're all alone, especially at this time when all the pandemic goes around. Some people don't want to have anybody around. They want to be alone. So how do you perform that mitzvah? You talk to yourself. Really? You talk to yourself. That's acceptable. If you have nobody around, you discuss it. You ask a question to yourself and give yourself an answer. Okay. Yeah. Okay, so Babu, here's also this particular verse is found in your Haggadah. We'll get to the Haggadah. I'll show it to you. The verse 8. Bavur zeh, so Hashem li b'tzeis Mitzrayim. Notice it says, you tell your child that day, saying, it's because of this. We'll get to what does it mean this, because of this that God has made, that God performed for me, that I went out when I went out from Egypt. What does this mean? Babu zeh, because of this. What's the this?
That we were slaves, and He redeemed us. Because of this great miracle.
Yeah, but there's something more. Babu zeh. Because the zeh refers to the mitzvot. Remember, you're sitting at the table. You say the table. You have a kara. You have your seder plate before you, and you have the matzah on it, and moror, and a bit of herbs and other things that you're going to use for the seder. The most important thing is the matzah and the moror, the bit of herbs. So you're saying, I have this. Why do I have all these things here? It's because of what God has done for me when I went out of Egypt. And notice it's written in a singular, because God did for me when I went out of Egypt. Well, yeah, you and I didn't go out of Egypt. So what does Haggadah say? It doesn't go the whole thing. What do we see from that? That's
one is supposed to participate individually in the exodus of Mitzrayim.
Yeah, if you participate and speak about it, it's considered as if you yourself departed from Egypt. Okay, but that's a because obviously we didn't go out ourselves. But since our ancestors went out, we are an extension of our ancestors. And it's like if we went out ourselves. Very important to link up with our ancestors. Moshe Rabbeinu did the same when he had the Shirat Moshe. Later on, after they departed, after they split into the Red Sea and so on, just the Sea reads, and then there was a song sung. Moshe Rabbeinu says, "Zek Kelev Yanteu." This is my God. It was a personal relationship I have with God, and I want to extol Him. Elokei Avi, but it's not only my God; He's the God of my fathers. He's the God of history. He's the same God. So we always have to relate to previous generations. So the same thing when you and I discuss the essence of Egypt, we're linking up with our ancestors. And so if that's the case, it's like if you and I have gone out from Egypt. Yeah. We'll just see. Egypt, okay. And that's what the Haggadah says. And when we have to get to the Haggadah, we'll see clearly. But the Gemara brings it down. What does it say? B'chol dor v'dor, throughout each generation, chayav adam l'ros es atzmo. A person should feel, that person himself should feel, as if he himself departed from Egypt. Based on this verse, where I should feel like if God has done for me, all what God has done for me when I went out of Egypt. Yeah. And that's the reason. It's not only verbally we should say it, but that's the reason why we have all these visual aids on our plate, the Seder plate, the Ka'ara. Again, and we point to it. But I mentioned many times when it says Zeh in the Torah, which means this, you point to, just like when they pick up the Torah in Shul, what do you say? V'zot HaTorah. What do people do? They usually point to the Torah. This is the Torah. The same thing over here. When we go ahead, when we get to the God, you'll see, whenever we talk about the matzah, in the moral, we say, matzah zo. This matzah, why do we eat it? And we point to the matzah. This moral. We shouldn't say moral, we say this moral. We're pointing to it to show that we have a relationship with it. Okay, so that's the whole idea of Babu Zeh, because of this. And then, like I mentioned before, we speak about the Exodus. So it's like if we ourselves, or to feel like you and I have departed from Egypt. Okay, now the Pasha goes into a mitzvah of tefillin. You see, it's just not. We know there's a special mitzvah of Haggadah to relate at length about the Exodus of Egypt, but we also have a daily mitzvah to recall the Exodus of Egypt, and one way of recalling it is through a mitzvah of tefillin. It could be also we have a verbal proclamation. Also, when we talk in the Shema Yisrael, the third paragraph, we discuss about the mitzvah of tzitzis, and I am God who took you out of the land of Egypt, and so on. So we recall it every day is the mitzvah to recall it, but to embellish on it is specifically only on the eve of the night of Pesach. Now it says verse 9, and not it should be a sign on your hand and remembrance on between your eyes. Now, what mitzvah are they talking about over here? You sign on your hand, tefillin. Now, how does tefillin become a sign for going out of Egypt? Because there are two of the parshios that are inserted into the tefillin talk about the Exodus of Egypt. And we're coming out of Egypt and going into Eretz Israel. In fact, one of the parshas, this parsha we're learning, this particular chapter 13. That chapter is written in the parshas in the tefillin. Okay, so
Kenny just bought new tefillin.
Yeah, Kenny bought new tefillin. That's true. Yeah.
Wasn't it until after the golden the Yegel Zahar that Hashem told that men had to wear tefillin?
No, here it is, right here. No, it's right here. Look what it says. I just quoted the verse 9. It shall be as a sign on your hand. Remember between your eyes. The word tefillin does not appear in the Torah, but it's referring to that again. The oral tradition tells us that means the mitzvah of tefillin. Okay.
I thought that the only men that had to wear it because of after the Yegel Zahav. They had to remember every day what they did.
Actually, they decided to do tefillin now. The question is, there are 4 parshios in the tefillin. The only 2 of them I mentioned before they actually departed from Egypt. So I remember the Babuch Rebbe explained that the original tefillin that they wore from the time they departed from Egypt until later on when they got the Torah, they got the Parsha Shema, Shema, they only had 2 parshios in their tefillin. Chapter 13 over here, and the next chapter, and the whole chapter 13, chapter 13. They only had 2 parshios then. So that tefillin, from the time they departed from Egypt until they got the full Torah on Mount Sinai, they only had tefillin 2 parshios. Later on, they had 4 parshios that we have to this for every day. But in the tefillin, talks about the Exodus from Egypt. Someone has suggested, one of the commentators said it's like we had in American history, the Emancipation Proclamation, freeing slaves in the South. Same thing as the tefillin in a way was your emancipation, your proclamation, written proclamation that you were redeemed from Egypt. God wrote it in the Torah, and you have that in your tefillin. I'm a free person. I'm not a slave anymore. Okay. That's another way of looking at it. So again, on verse 9, to be a sign between your eyes, a remembrance, a sign on your arm, on your hand, I should say, and a remembrance between your eyes. Lamanti Torah Hashem b'ficha, so the laws of God will be in your mouth. By the way, we learn from that tefillin, and you write the parchment of the tefillin has the parchments must come from a kosher animal. Laws of the Torah shall be on your mouth, something that you can consume. Okay. Because with a strong hand, God took you out of Egypt. Okay. Now, let's finish the chapter up. You should guard this law, Moadah, from season to season. Okay. Or some say, but some Rashi said it means from year to year, referring to the holiday. Others want to say that it's referring to the mitzvah tefillin, which was performed only during the daytime and not during the night. And of course, it's also you're exempt from tefillin on Shabbat. Why are we exempt from tefillin on Shabbat and on holidays?
So you don't carry.
That's one. No, not because we don't need a tefillin as a sign. Shabbat itself is a sign. Remember, going back to that Rambam, where the Rambam associates the Exodus of Egypt with Shabbat. So you remember the departure from Egypt, and says remember the Sabbath. So you don't have, you need, the Sabbath is good enough. It's good enough for us to remember the Sabbath, God's creator of the world. We don't need to fill in. But during the week when we don't have Shabbat, we need to fill in to remind us of that. All right. Okay, we'll meet again in Metz Hashem. Thursday night, right? What do we do time? 8 o'clock.
Thursday.
Right? 8 o'clock, we'll continue our study about Pesach. So have a wonderful day. Any questions?
Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Everybody knows.
You too.